Hello, everybody. How nice for you to join us today. And I think we have a few different time zones represented here as well. Holly coming in from Switzerland, and we have some West Coast time on here as well. So let's get started. I can't tell you how excited I am to welcome everybody to today's session, Catching Up with Curators, a Decade in Art History. Working with Anna and Emily and Holly is something I've been talking about from when I started here and focusing on the arts here at Hobart and William Smith. And this is just really wonderful. And I love seeing all the familiar faces. So just to get started, I am Theresa Gage. I'm Assistant Director of Alumni and Alumni Relations here at Hobart and William Smith. And it's always fun to share that I renovated and lived in William Smith's home here in Geneva as an innkeeper. It's actually where I first met Holly and her family at her graduation party at the inn. I'm married to a Hobart grad, which is always fun, and my daughter is a current junior here. But before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping details. We're going to keep the microphones muted just so that it'll just limit on the background noise. They will have some screens to share. So it might be easier to keep your Zoom on speaker view or spotlight view, and you'll see that up at the upper right-hand corner so that you'll have a bigger screen when they share. Please use the chat feature. Anna and I will be watching for that. And if there's any questions, we'll just hopefully organically put them all in. And if we do run out of time, you can always email me at alumrelations@hws.edu. And we'll just make sure that we get everything taken care of there. Well, let me introduce, I have just the special, it's just so special to introduce Anna today, our moderator for the day. She is William Smith class of 2009. Anna is the Clarence A. Davis class of 48 Visual Arts Curator at Houghton House here at the colleges. And that is where she manages our permanent art collection, acts as gallery director, and teaches curatorial and exhibition practicum courses. She received her PhD in art history at the University of Washington and an MA at Indiana University. She has previous curatorial experience at the Delaware Art Museum, Seattle Art Museum, and Henry Art Gallery in Seattle. Her research focuses on 19th and early 20th century English and American art and material culture. And all of these women have made me want to go back to school for art history. But right now I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and here we go.
Great, thank you, Theresa. I just want to say thanks and welcome. I know for students that are joining us, this is an especially hectic time of the year, so I really appreciate you, being here. I started at the colleges in 2018, and that was not something that I ever thought I was going to do, but it's been really exciting to experience the art history curriculum from a different perspective, and particularly exciting when this involves interesting conversations with interesting people as it does today. So I'm going to start off by introducing Emily and Holly and then turning it over to them. So I'll start with Holly Roussell, who is a class of 2010. She's a Swiss and American independent curator, museologist, and researcher with an in-depth knowledge of contemporary art and photography from East Asia, particularly in post-1976 Chinese contemporary art, avant-garde artist groups, and exhibition histories, Roussell served as coordinator of the Worldwide Traveling Exhibitions Program and Photography Prize, the Prix Élysée for the Musée du Lycée in Lausanne from 2013 to 2017. She co-founded the Asia Photography Project, a nonprofit curatorial collective and platform for photography from East Asia. She has more independent curatorial projects than I can do justice to here, but two highlights include as a curator for the 4th Shenzhen Independent Animation Biennale in 2018, and as co-curator for the major exhibition project Civilization, The Way We Live Now, which continues to travel extensively to multiple venues. In April, she will join the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, South Korea, as an international curatorial researcher in residence. And Emily Sorokin is also class of 2010. She is the SVP Director of Operations for the Americas at Christie's Auction House. She leads international operations across North and South America with responsibility for all auction, exhibition, warehousing, art handling, and office operations. Throughout her career at Christie's, Emily has overseen over 800 exhibitions and the sale of several $1 billion worth of fine art, including Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. Emily's current focus is on expanding corporate efforts in sustainability. Prior to joining Christie's, Emily began her professional journey as an analyst with ArtVest Partners, providing art market analysis to a broad base of fine art collectors and investors. Emily lives in Brooklyn with her husband, newborn daughter, and 2 dogs. Our paths overlapped a bit at HWS, so it's also just selfishly really nice to see these 2 humans again in this context. And so I'm going to start off with kind of a general question. Could you describe your job and the role that you have in the arts ecosystem? And Emily, why don't we start off with you?
Sure. And it's perhaps a little bit of a stretch to call my job, strictly curatorial, but there's so many curatorial aspects to what I do. So in brief, what I focus on is really anything and everything that would be considered behind the scenes. So in the world of auction, you have your specialists who are focused on certain categories of art and objects. They're also responsible for pulling the sales together, selling those sales. So these are folks who've really dedicated their lives to an incredibly niche section of the art world or the art market. But then behind, what most people know of as Christie's, the auctions and the specialists, are all of the operations folks. So the machine that's really churning out those 800 sales, or let's say 100 sales a year, or what have you, are the groups that I look after. So we have 9 verticals that range from exhibition design to art handling, as Anna mentioned, to real estate and property management. We have not only sale rooms and offices throughout the world, all of those need proper care, proper strategizing, budget management. And of course, there's always the fun layer of special events, which lives under operations as well. So we're the group that's really working hand in hand with, let's say, marketing and communications and sort of all the other groups that pull together the brand that many of us know as Christie's. So it takes a village, and I get to sort of say I'm the mayor of one of those villages at Christie's, and I've been there for 10 years now. So I'll turn it over to Holly, because I think we'll both have 2 really interesting sides of the art coin, art ecosystem coin.
Thanks, so absolutely. As Emily said, the curator, the word curator, the role curator, and it's part of the reason that we were thinking about this as a topic for the talk today. It's used a lot today, and it's something that we discuss a lot as well in the art world. What is a curator? What does that mean? And I think it's particularly interesting today. We have 3 people who could call themselves curators, and we all do something very different. And I think for kind of young alum or current students, that's the thing to take away from this, is that there are so many jobs with an art history degree or working in the arts that are possible. And sometimes I remember when I graduated, I had just a little idea of what some of those were. So there's a lot of different possibilities out there, depending on what you love and what your passions are. So on my end, I've been working as a curator probably since around 2013. Not quite 10 years. And I would call myself a facilitator type curator, a contemporary art curator. And so I make that specification because I think, Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, but your role may be a bit more in the kind of historic use of the term, like a conservateur, someone also taking care of a collection. And in the contemporary, that's
Yes.
Yeah, part of also what you're doing at the colleges. And so that's not what I'm doing. I'm actually working as a curator that's collaborating with living artists, working on projects about their work, and then also working on projects where I have an idea, or with someone else, we have an idea about contemporary art, about the world at large. And we try to share with the public how artists are letting us have these new ideas and experiences through their artwork. And so I thought it may be useful just to give a tiny visual of what we're doing. So I prepared a couple pictures I'd just like to show to you today about the kind of work that I'm doing to give you a better sense of what it is. So I'm doing two different main types of curatorial projects, primarily focusing around exhibitions. And then often with exhibitions, we're going to work on a catalog or a book that's going to accompany the project. One of the reasons that we always try to have a book is because an exhibition is temporary and it's going to disappear. And so for the sake of history, whenever we can afford it and whenever the institution can help us to do it, we try to create a book, and then that's lasting and that can kind of enter into libraries. It can continue research later on. So here are some photos. This is from the exhibition that Anna mentioned in the introduction, Civilization the Way We Live Now. And this is a major photography exhibition that includes the work of over 140 photographers from around the world. All right. This exhibition is really, it's an exhibition I'm co-curating with my mentor and a veteran curator, William Ewing, in photography. And we started this project with an idea, and it was that looking at lots of contemporary photography, we were observing that artists focus their projects very specifically often. But if we look at many projects, we can start to see that actually photography is giving us a picture of the world that we live in today. And the picture that it's giving us is maybe not the one we anticipate. It's a picture that's more planetary, more collective, and interconnected than sometimes our individual tendencies would lead us to imagine. And so we created an exhibition, and we chose the different artists to represent this theme. The artists come from around the world. And so these are kind of different installation views of how we've presented this work around the world. This is in Seoul, in South Korea in 2018. And a lot of what my job as a curator is one, it's going to be selecting the artworks, researching the artists, and writing about this theme or topic. And then on top of that, it's going to be determining the production, the scenography, the installation plan for these different spaces. As you'll see, this is the same exhibition. It looks very different in each location. Here are some other projects that I've worked on. So these are, as Emily mentioned, she's working at Christie. So that's in the kind of more for-profit end of the sector. I'm working primarily in museums. So there we're kind of non-for-profit, but we definitely influence each other. Because museum exhibitions can definitely influence auction sales. It can also give important exposure for artists for the first time. This exhibition here was presented in Germany in 2015. I think it's an interesting example of that direct connection, actually. So it was a show that we were offered the possibility to have a great, amazing museum, the Folkwang Museum in Essen, Germany, to present the work of Chinese photography. And it was basically a carte blanche commission that I was given with William Ewing. And we chose around 20 Chinese artists, and we asked them actually what we'd like is to see exactly what you planned on showing in China this year. So rather than having this lapse of time where they were going to exhibit their work in 2015 and then we were going to see it maybe 3 years later in the West if we're lucky, we said, no, tell us exactly right now, and we're going to put it up. And it was very interesting because following this exhibition, for many of them, it was the first time that they had an exhibition outside of China. And we saw immediate results in gallery representation, in publications abroad. So I think it's interesting to say that maybe we work in different aspects of curating, but we definitely are very connected.
And actually on that, it's just, Holly, hearing you talk about the sort of full scope of what your experience as a curator has been. We sort of have two divergent paths that actually come to the same point, and that's around the production and the installation and the exhibition management and the production of catalogs or books or other content material, but actually it's whereas there's an intentional aspect to the kind of curation that Holly works on, the other side of that coin where auction comes in is a little bit of curating some order out of chaos. We don't necessarily know more than 3 months out what kind of art or fine art or objects are going to come in for sale. And so sometimes you're just kind of handed this crate or many crates, and you have to make some kind of sense curatorially of that material. And so it becomes a total jigsaw puzzle, but a lot of fun in so many of those similar, just kind of engaging ways when you're really thinking about the material that we get to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note about production, I mean, we're going to talk a bit about this later, the things that are a bit unexpected about what we do. But I think the part of what I love the most is that aspect of curating, and it's very creative, and it's supporting artists, acting as a sounding board for them and helping them to conceive of how they'd like to present their work. And it's through visiting a lot of exhibitions, studying them, and being really attuned to how your experience is going to change on the basis of the space and the arrangement of the space. And then later, like slowly over time, you start to have really concrete opinions about, okay, if we hang this work and we hang it at this height, it's going to be really interesting for the visitor. But if we hang it too low, or if we make it too small, it's not going to have the same impact. So there's definitely a lot of that as well in the kind of contemporary art curator sphere.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the order out of chaos aspect that Emily is talking about. That might be the thing that unites our three positions, which are really different in many other ways, that ability to like pivot and be flexible and to engage with physical realities that maybe you weren't expecting at the time. And I mean, since this is kind of related, why don't we actually jump to that kind of question about an unexpected aspect of your job, partly because this morning I had to fit 18 feet of foam core in my car from the hardware store that I need to pack prints. And so it's fresh in my mind, the things that I didn't know that I was going to have to do when I started this process. So what is an unexpected aspect of your job? And yeah, Emily, if you want to start off with that too.
And actually, I'll take a spin through two images as well. Just bear with me as I pull these up. So, like I said, making order out of chaos, it can take quite a few different forms in the auction world. And so we work not only with very contemporary artists, living artists, but also items of antiquity. And so there's a bit of surprise factor. Like I said, you never necessarily know what's going to come through the doors. And so I learned very quickly that I needed to rely on so much of the generalist art historical knowledge that I gained through Hobart and William Smith, because otherwise I'd sink like a leaky ship, because not only are we having to think about how best to present the material, but it's also in our care for a period of time. So we really need to understand the physical properties. We need to understand how to install pieces, how to handle them carefully and safely. And sometimes they don't come with instruction manuals. So there's sort of two examples of that here. On the left-hand side for me is a Jeff Kuhn's balloon dog. So this is a pretty famous piece. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And this showed up, let's see, I was in my 4th year at Christie's, and I started in operations, but I was, let's say, working my way up through the ranks. And this was the first time that I was really running an exhibition entirely on my own. And in came 15 different crates and a team from Germany that spoke. One person spoke a little bit of English, and they basically said, Jeff Koons is a very, very exacting individual. He likes things to be accurate down to the millimeter, and yet nobody had any, let's say, printed instructions for how to assemble this balloon dog. So we had all of these crates. We were working with our rigging company to, safely sort of strap up and assemble this piece. And so much of it was just, making sense of, okay, we need to understand not only the floor load capacity and, how much weight we need to disperse across, we call it a plinth or a pedestal, so that this wouldn't sink through the floor. Christie's is above the New York City subway system, so we have to be very careful that, we've got a parking garage and the subway tunnels underneath us. We can't have anything too heavy. But we were also sort of unexpectedly having to work with a living artist who had very specific ideas about how and where this piece would be presented, a team that was familiar with the work or the body of work, but not necessarily with installing this particular piece, and then the whole Christie's ecosystem. So that was definitely unexpected. But perhaps my favorite example is these floating balloon fish by an artist, Luis Perino, that we ended up selling in the same auction as the Leonardo da Vinci, which sounds sort of, mind-blowing. How can you have on one hand this incredible sort of item of historical significance with, alongside this highly sort of tactile and experiential, very, very contemporary and frankly pretty new artist. He had not at the time had any real auction sales, and the entire sort of work is about experiencing space with these fish, and we had to cleverly figure out how to not only sort of let them float freely around our building, but also keep them contained. We had a lot of other artworks hanging up on the walls. We couldn't have fish floating and bumping into them. So it's hard to tell, but just off to the side there are a couple of, you can sort of just see fishing line there. You can see maybe a little bit of a glisten. And let me just reshare my screen. It looks like that dropped off. But we ended up basically creating a fish tank out of our sort of center atrium in our building. So like I said, we never really know what's going to come in through our doors or who we're going to be working with, but it definitely leads for a lot of learning on the fly.
That's really fun. I think it's there are a lot of unexpected things. I had a hard time with this question, narrowing it down. But so specifically because I know that there are some current and former students on the call. One thing I would say that is was surprising to me was the value of interests outside of art history. Just as I'm not going to go into further detail than that really, but I do think that as a curator, it has been incredibly relevant. If you're interested in anthropology, if you're interested in sociology, if you're interested in history or language, all of those things are actually going to be really relevant because you're going to make them relevant in your work, and it's going to kind of nourish your ideas in a way that I think maybe I didn't anticipate when I first started off. The other thing is that I always travel with a laser level, and I love to hang art wallpaper, and it can be much more creative than maybe you would anticipate. So this is the fun part of the slideshow, I guess, and I hope this will work. So I prepared a couple little pictures to show the reality of my job, which is maybe a little different than what you would anticipate. So here we saw.
I was gonna say everything I wear has pockets because I always have a tape measure. I always have like 10 things that I need to carry around in my hands.
For sure. So this is the exhibition I think I showed you before from Seoul, and this is a major, big international exhibition. And actually, when we started, this was my mock-up. This is how I started. It didn't always look like this. So voila, now the internet knows. I work with, sorry, Stan, I can see him there looking at my model. It's really rustic. It's really basic. But no, so it's a lot of, and this was the installation of the exhibition. So I walk into the space and it looks like this. And then people ask you, are the boards in the right place? And the photographs aren't on them yet. So it's a lot of decision making. You decide, the height that works are going to be hung on the wall. It's not arbitrary. And those are decisions that we have to make with intention. And you do it over time. And the reason for the laser level is that, so here they were very well prepared, but that's not always the case. Hold on, those aren't the in this case, one of these is my laser level because I showed up at a photography festival and we ended up needing to hang the show ourselves. In some cases, depending on where I would work, and I've been working a lot in East Asia, you know, there are major museum exhibitions, but then I've also been doing a lot of smaller projects as well, where I collaborate with an artist and we go to a photo festival. In those cases, sometimes they have a team to help you, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes you think maybe you could do it better than someone who's never hung art wallpaper before because it's not something common. And so it's been, here's the example of me hanging art wallpaper. But so there's definitely aspects of the job, also including communication, promotion. You have to be comfortable speaking in public, that I think we don't anticipate right away when we think I'm going into a career of reading and writing and working with museum objects. The last project I did want to mention, so this was from the Animation Biennial in Shenzhen that Anna mentioned in the introduction. And so this is tough to take photos of. It was a stop motion animation commission. So 3 films that I invited a Swiss artist to produce in Shenzhen. And so my job as curator was actually to determine that this was the artist we wanted to invite to the Biennale. Then it was to support him in any way he needed to have the right materials, the right room location, and then to write about his work. That was my role. So it's very different than the other exhibitions I was working on. And so in this case, it actually meant he's an artist who works a lot with found materials. And this is at a dump in Shenzhen, actually, where he asked me, can we find a trash dump? I need to go collect some things so I can use them in the performance. And so we ended up there. They didn't let us stay very long, but it definitely wasn't somewhere I anticipated ever going. And then we came back, you know, we have to buy wood. We had to do all sorts of very practical things. So I think something unexpected in the job is it can be very fun, but it's also totally multifaceted.
I'm laughing, Holly, because on several occasions I've had to have sort of the debriefing with our night cleaners to make sure they know what's art and what's not, because we've had a couple of scares where every once in a while somebody will think something, you know, displayed on the floor without a pedestal is trash. And we have to be, you know, really mindful about, you know, not just what we all know to be artwork, but how we're introducing a little bit of education sometimes just to the groups that we're working with.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I never thought I would have strong opinions about laser levels and about, you know, different types of rulers and other things like that, but I do strongly. And because the floor here is very, very uneven, that laser level's been a real saving grace. This is kind of a broad question, but since this is an alumni kind of conversation that we're having, you know, I think it's also helpful to maybe just start back at the beginning. How did you get where you are right now in a brief sketch? And what is an HWS memory or first steps at HWS kind of memory that was really formative for you? So Emily, if you wanna.
Yeah, sure. I have to say I had absolutely zero exposure to art history as a practice before HWS, and so it was sort of the beginning, the middle, and in many ways the ongoing, never-ending component of what I'm doing now. But I had one class. It was a little bit of a teaser. I absolutely fell in love with not just the material, the subject, but the experience of the class. And I think being able to pull together so many different disciplines all into this one experience of thinking critically, writing critically, analyzing objects, and really being exposed not just to artwork, but how to observe, how to think about the sort of interactions that we're having with everyday art, with design. I mean, there's so much that art history taught me just about kind of how to see. I know that sounds a little bit esoteric now, but I really think that I've taken so much of that into what I do currently, because I have to be able to, I think Anna, you said it before, pivot really quickly. And in my line of work, it's, even though I'm behind the scenes and I'm not necessarily as engaged academically as a sort of more traditional curator would be with the objects, so much of just the exposure to so many different types of art, but also ways of thinking about, writing about, and experience and working with art came from HWS. So that was really, like I said, the sort of beginning, the middle, and the never-ending journey. But I would also say, how did I get here? I had absolutely no intention of working in an auction house. I loved the sort of theoretical work. I loved research. I loved working with art on an academic level. And I had absolutely no desire to dedicate myself to one particular topic or one particular type of art or time period. In fact, that was probably the biggest struggle I had when I was thinking about, do I want to pursue an advanced degree? Do I want to just go right into the job market? Fingers crossed, I land a job. And I think a lot of the sort of confidence that I was able to lean on in I know what I like to do. I know what I don't like to do. Just came from the experiences I had, working with so many of the terrific professors at HWS. Ultimately, I just took the first job that I got, and that took a while. And I reflect often, especially when I'm talking to students or recent alums, recent graduates, that my first job, Holly and I graduated in 2010, so sort of just on the tail end of a pretty gnarly recession. And I'm sure that feels very, very relevant and very real to several of you. But my first job was in a restaurant, and actually it was that restaurant experience that my hiring manager, my first manager ever at Christie's, attributed to me getting the job, because she said that she would value those experiences. And so a lot of that flexibility comes from just you learn as much as you can from wherever you are, and whatever experiences you are lucky enough to have, and you sort of just keep taking steps forward, and you keep learning from whatever those steps are.
Yeah, I think that's I have a very different parcours, but I think I completely agree with what you're saying. It's sometimes these very small steps that you don't see how they're related. And then they eventually come together with something, because they're all building up to where you're going to be. No, we're not there yet, I guess, right? But just to where we are now. My route was a little different, but like Emily, I was a bit nervous at graduation, because it's definitely not simple to find a job working in with a degree in art history. There's a ton of competition. And I had taken a trip with my sister, and I'm very thankful to that, because it was really life-changing for me. I took a trip in 2008, and that was between my junior and senior year. Would have been junior and senior year at Hobart. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And when we took that trip, we traveled to China and India. At the time, I'd taken Professor Blanchard's class on Chinese gardens and Chinese and Japanese gardens. And I'd taken kind of intro to East Asian art history. And my sister was also really interested in that. And I was fortunate that she was keen to take me on a trip to East Asia. And I was very surprised when we got there, because I became fascinated by contemporary Chinese art. It wasn't what I expected at all. We had planned a trip where we were going to visit all of the sites of Buddhist significance in India and China, and look at the symbolism and changes in the art. And actually, I became much more interested in what was happening in these young art districts. And so that really changed everything for me. When I came back to Hobart, prior to that, I had studied Italian. I was about to go to Rome for the study abroad program, and I still went to Rome, but then I started taking Mandarin Chinese, and realized that I'd unfortunately made that choice a bit too early. But anyway, it wasn't a problem. I studied my senior year Mandarin Chinese, and then I suggested to Patricia Matthews, who I'm so thankful for that she supported me. I asked her if I could write my honors thesis on contemporary Chinese art. And it was, in 2010, it was not a topic that was very common in universities. It's still not, because it's very young. And she said, I'm a professor of contemporary art. I'm interested. Let's do it. And so she gave me wonderful advice, even if it wasn't necessarily a topic that was her specialty. And it was an incredible experience. I was able to do kind of a research project that I had to pilot a lot on my own, because I had to research those Chinese artists and then prepare for the panel when you defend your project. And it was a really meaningful research for me that I actually ended up using later in different exhibition projects. So it is just a side note, I would say, like, something I took from my time at HWS that I think is relevant for current and past students is that you can use those opportunities where you have to do these kind of longer term projects, use them to your advantage, because you have to spend a lot of time on them. You're going to be doing research, and in real life, when you get out of university, you rarely have that kind of time or mind space to force yourself to dedicate as much as you do in those settings, in an academic setting. And so for me, that project was a way to catapult into working in Chinese contemporary art and to having something to say when there was an exhibition about landscape photography. And I said, I just wrote my undergrad thesis on landscape photography and the representation of the land in Chinese contemporary photography. So I have 10 artists and I'd like to show them, and I think it's important to, it was strange to say that, but actually at the time I was one of few people who had studied that. So definitely use that opportunity of the honors project. But so basically after Hobart, I applied to Beijing University. I went to study Chinese full-time for a year in Beijing. So just kind of up and left. There were no jobs to be had. So yeah. And during that time, I worked part-time doing other things not related to art. I taught children's yoga. I tutored in English in Beijing, anything that wouldn't take too much time but would allow me to study Chinese. And then I started trying to have different internships in the arts. I worked as an artist assistant for a Chinese artist. I worked as an assistant for a photo festival. They needed someone who spoke a little French, a little English, and a little Chinese. And so all of those were kind of ways to force myself to use Chinese and to get into the art world there as best I could. Ultimately, it didn't really work. In 2012, just before 2012, I was living in a very small apartment in Beijing. We had black mold everywhere. It was just before Christmas. Couldn't shower because it was so cold on the floor, because it was one of those like traditional Chinese homes and we had almost no heating. And my boyfriend at the time, husband now, we said, we're done. We need to leave China. This is too much. That dream of, moving here and working in art, it's not for now. Let's try something else. And so we did. We moved to Switzerland, which is where he's from, and I applied for an internship. And when I showed up for my internship meeting, the person that was about to interview me said, I'm so happy you applied. I remember you from the photo festival in Beijing. And I said, what? And so it was this tiny job that was unpaid where I basically ran around. It was really rough for 2 weeks, chasing artists that I couldn't speak to really and trying to make sure they were at the right place at the right time. I talked with all of the foreign guests, and it turned out that one of them was from the museum that I would coincidentally go to apply for an internship. I'd like to say that I planned that, but I didn't. And so that was serendipitous. And he ended up being a great mentor for me. I did a longer internship than was anticipated because I liked it so much. And then went and did my master's degree in Switzerland because I felt the need to kind of continue studies. And also if I wanted to live there, I had to be able to speak French. So there, try to shorten that. It's kind of a long parcours, but basically, so post internship, I met a really important mentor in another internship, who was William Ewing. We met in 2013, and it was my boss at the museum who had suggested we connect. And he basically really changed my life for me, changed my path as a curator, because he is a veteran curator, very well known in photography, former museum director. And he took me under his wing and he gave me the chance to work on exhibitions with him, to have an opinion about things. And he really taught me to look, and the importance of looking a lot, the importance of reading, the importance of writing. And it was, I'm a firm believer that curating, at least as I've seen it, is best learned through experience. And yeah, I'll stop there, not to talk too long.
Thank
Anna,
you.
I was going to jump in and have your side of that as well. You said that it was unexpected that you would be back at Hobart and William Smith. And what were some of your memories and things that brought you back to us?
Sure. Well, I don't really have anything prepared for this, but what I can say is, I think kind of what both Emily and Holly are highlighting, that a lot of it is sort of serendipitous. And for me, at least, like coming from a pretty small town without a lot of museum experience, like being here and having access to things that I maybe wouldn't have had at a larger institution, and also having, faculty members who were willing to kind of take it on faith that I could handle whatever they were kind of throwing my way, and being able to figure that out. But I really remember, like, which is kind of a surreal thing now, going into the art collection storage for the first time and having someone hand me a Hokusai print and being like, here it is. What do you have to say about it? Like, that was a really incredible thing, and something that, I think is one of the most rewarding aspects of positions such as this, and what you all are doing as well, is facilitating that access to people who maybe historically don't have it. And a lot of what came after was just, trying to navigate sort of the realm of unpaid positions, which is really fraught and complicated, and something that often requires you to be working other positions at the same time. How do you navigate that? But those spaces could then lead to other spaces, which is what ended up happening, in my case, kind of both in New York City first. So I graduated like right at the height of the recession as well. And so, doing a series of temp jobs for a year and just trying to fit in. And I think Holly had mentioned too, just trying to see as many things as you can, and read as many things as you can, and being exposed to artists who I had never heard of and had never, experienced before. And I think that, that critical thinking aspect is something that this institution really prepared me for. And so, and again, another serendipitous thing was that this job was open when I was applying to basically any art history position I could find when I was defending, and that it just ended up working out. So
can I tell a quick internship story?
Absolutely.
And actually, Holly and Anna and Theresa, we hadn't talked about this, but my first internship in the arts came by way of a law firm, a group called Triax Capital Advisors, that were the receivers of the Salander O'Reilly Gallery. Salander O'Reilly, or Larry Salander rather, is somewhat notorious for having been thrown in prison for fraudulent activities in the art market. And while there was this ongoing investigation and various sort of court trials, there was a law firm that was in charge of basically managing all of the holdings of the gallery. And the lawyers who were introduced to me serendipitously by a general contractor who at the time was working on a renovation of my family home, as well as one of the homes of the lawyers, said, hey, Em, you study art history, right? I'm working with, on a house with these lawyers, and they need somebody to help pull together a database or something, because they have all of this artwork and they don't know what's what. Would you be interested? I don't think it's paid, but it happened to be the month of December. HWS was sort of closed for the winter break, and I said, yeah, sure. I mean, amazing. I'd love to. Sounds cool. I knew absolutely nothing about, didn't know the name, didn't really know the gallery scene much in New York. And anyway, went and had a conversation with the lawyers over, takeout Chinese food. And they basically showed me to a room with, just boxes stacked of redacted files, and then a warehouse, and said, we don't know what we're looking at. We just need someone to kind of help basically pull together some Excel sheets so we can track what belongs to who, what is what, and basically make sense of and perhaps even validate some of these very ill-kept records that the gallery had. Anyway, long story short, I ended up getting, let's say, an office of my own that had a Goya hanging on the wall. There were Bernini sculptures in the basement, and it was me and these three lawyers, with like the key card access to this townhouse the gallery was in on, it was basically Fifth Ave, so right on Central Park and 77th Street. And every single day I would go in and basically catalog and research. But one of the, and I promise this, I'll sort of wrap this up, but one of the most unexpected moments was, I'm riding this high of having sort of access to this incredible cache of material. And we went to a warehouse on the Upper West Side that had additional holdings from the gallery. And we're going through, all of the material. And I open up a box to see what's inside, and there's a sort of a ceramic vase, and it's not labeled. And I'm kind of, I'm wearing my gloves and I'm looking at the vase, and I see that there's a name on it, and I've got my sort of spreadsheet that I'm diligently filling out. And so I describe the vase, and I describe the material, and I put artist name, and I list the name that had been described, been inscribed on the bottom of the vase. And then I lift the lid, and lo and behold, it was ashes. And it turned out that it was, in fact, the artist himself, who had effectively bequeathed his own ashes to this gallery. But there I was thinking, is he the artist? What's the medium here? Human body part. I'm like, oh God, what would Elena Cialetti do here? How would I describe this one? So anyway, so much of it is serendipitous, but also so much of it is just making those connections and sort of networking, because you can find some really unexpected and terrific experiences in the least linear path. I never would have thought to talk to a general contractor working on my parents' house, to work with a bunch of lawyers, to have probably one of the most formative internship experiences that I ever could have imagined. So there's hope. There's hope for all of us.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that if I can. I just think it's really true that that actually, I think, as unfortunate as the fact that a lot of the internships are unpaid, and I hope that that's going to be improving. And I know that it's something that our generation, I think we definitely experienced it, and I know, at least personally, I don't plan on having unpaid interns, and I'd like to move forward in that direction. And that's the most we can hope for, because if we're not the ones making the decisions, we're not necessarily in charge of it yet. But I think it's important to try to get into different types of institutions, whether that be an auction house, whether that be working in a collection, whether that be in a museum, whether that be in a publishing house. Because even if what you're doing there isn't what you ultimately will end up doing or what you love, it'll let you know what the other options are. And it's really difficult to see that from the outside. And I mean, my first internship, this one that I did in Switzerland, I was doing traveling exhibitions and external affairs. So public relations, operations for traveling exhibitions, and basically promotion, selling our shows to other museums abroad. What that gave me was a massive network of institutions around the world, contacts, understanding of budgets, understanding of all of the background, how I need to promote a show. And then when I became an independent curator, I didn't learn to curate from that, but I learned everything else. And so I had this experience that allowed me to basically take my toolkit and say, okay, I can apply what I learned to my own projects and hope to travel them around the world, because I've learned how to do that in the museum. And it also gave me the chance to see what everyone else did and say, my day-to-day life, what would I like my job to be? I'd like it to be this one. And you really get to see those things. And so I think if you can juggle it in one way or another, don't be afraid to try different things. And get into the different spheres of the arts ecosystem to see which one has a job that interests you the most. And then you can kind of work towards that as a goal. But before you know what they are, it's really tough to say what you want to be.
It's so true. And just to put a point on that from my own experience, I continue to take courses whenever I can squeeze them in. Courses in corporate finance, courses in management and leadership, union negotiations. That's something that I have to do every couple of years, as we have a large population of collective bargaining members that work in the auction house within operations. So much of the experiences are continuous, and as you find different sort of avenues and different paths, as Holly said, it's not necessarily going to be linear or just one kind of direct experience in the arts ecosystem, but there are aspects that are business oriented. There are aspects that are more academic and scholarly. There are also aspects that are very hands-on and practical and tactile. I think of commercial real estate for managing gallery spaces. So there's just so many different, let's say, transferable skills that you can constantly be sort of adding to that toolkit.
And so this kind of relates, we've gotten a question about the sort of unpaid internship aspect, which you both have responded to. And just to kind of summarize this question a little bit, what do you view as the role of paid internships as creating new space for aspiring arts professionals from diverse economic backgrounds? It's crucial, and it's something that we as a field have been, incredibly terrible at historically. And I think one of the art world being at a reckoning point in large part because of the pandemic, which has sort of forced these issues into the forefront in a way that maybe they weren't before, or have been, kind of talked about for a really long time. But I think, this summer, as I was writing rec letters for students, like this was really the first time that I saw a lot of paid internship opportunities, and then all of them got cut because the museums shut. And so that's, I think, going to be a really critical concern moving forward, is how do those resources get reallocated, because they should be. And I know when I was an undergrad, my advice was basically, or like the advice I was given was to try and get these positions in Boston or in New York City, which I absolutely couldn't have afforded. And so ended up just going to the historical house in my hometown and saying, like, I can do this and work somewhere here. And basically those folks like teaching me how to use Excel, teaching me how to do metadata, like people that know this because they're doing all of these different aspects of the job. And that there are, as you both have said, like spaces that you can find for this, kind of given the unfortunate financial realities of our field a lot of the time.
And I think I can probably speak for both Holly and myself, because we're privileged to have had the experience that we have, but also work with teams of people and have a little bit of influence in who and how we're hiring, whether that's for internships or full paid positions. But I think there's a tremendous responsibility that we have to take and look very honestly at our industry. And Anna, exactly as you mentioned, recognize that there is a very, very small group of people that can afford to live in New York and New York City and take an unpaid internship at a leading auction house. And that crowd looks an awful lot like me. And it's something I really, truly feel very deeply about. And I think we're starting to see more of a shift. But it is, I think, because of the general awareness, and I think the knowledge and the passion that sort of people in my position and Holly's position that have had those recent experiences ourselves, those unpaid internships, who are really trying to drive forward more available opportunities for a more diverse crowd across all aspects of the industry. It's just so hugely important, and I think we probably have a bigger role to play than we can necessarily acknowledge, in our day-to-day, but definitely something that our generation will be championing.
No, I definitely agree. And I think that, from my side, we can talk about, people who want to have art history degrees, but it's also, it's also the artists. I don't know if there's anyone here who's in studio art, but it's the situation of unpaid internships is one thing. And I think that, what we can do is we can talk about it. We can talk about how it's not okay, and we can talk about what we're going to do. And when we're in positions where we can have people working with us, that we make sure that we're paying them for their work, that we're appreciating their work, and we're giving them credit for their work. And I think also on my end, something that I've been trying very actively to do is to make sure that all of the artists I work with are paid. And that's not obvious, which may be surprising, but often they will propose to pay me. And they'll propose to pay, an institution will propose to pay for the production, but they won't pay for the artist because it's all about exposure. And so I think it's a big reckoning in, maybe our generation to say exposure isn't enough. We're all people that at least for me and for artists, when we work independently, we don't have a salary. So everything you make is on the basis of projects. And it's important that people also recognize that the work that you did before and after that they never saw, it was there. I think we're going to get there.
I do too. And I often like to sort of separate out, like internships don't necessarily have to be an unpaid, kind of short-term experience. I have quite a few friends who, instead of seeking out internships, actually tried to find paying jobs in artist studios because they figured I'm going to get a very similar kind of exposure. I might even have work that's more hands-on. And that became a really meaningful avenue for them. And they said, to heck with an internship at the Met if it's not going to pay me, and I can actually have a totally different experience working, say, with an artist in his or her studio or whatever. So I think it's really trying to cast as wide a net as possible and look at the whole arts ecosystem, as Holly was saying, and not necessarily feel like you need to pigeonhole yourself into finding an internship. That doesn't necessarily have to be your first step. It can be something you get to later. It can be something you get to never. And you can sort of trust that it is a big enough industry with so many different layers and so many different sort of types of work in the industry that, if you look really broadly at it, there's usually some really sort of golden nugget opportunities that are out there.
Yeah. We are just under that hour mark, and I feel like we could go on for a whole other hour. Very quickly, very briefly, I just want to very quickly say, how has COVID-19 shifted how you work and how you're relating to your space now as curators? And then I think we can wrap it up. And if there's any other questions, just make sure I'll put my email in the chat. But like I said, I feel like we could go on for more. So we'll answer that one quick and wrap up.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. And also, let me just say thank you. This has been such a terrific opportunity to reconnect with Holly and Anna. And I'm actually on my maternity leave, so I'm a little bit rusty, but it's been really nice just to sort of put my thinking cap on again. And very, very happy to answer over email or chat, any other questions. COVID-19, that has been, unfortunately, as ops director, my direct responsibility for the past, let's say, since January. We have not only had to manage the health and safety of all of our staff, but following all of the government guidelines, which change every minute. It impacts how our business works, how we travel. We're doing a lot more online. So some of our business models have had to change on the fly, where we're storing artwork, how we're photographing artwork, pretty much anything and everything that we took for granted as the day job was turned on its head. And so I think, what's, short term, COVID-19 has really shown a spotlight on the importance of two things. The first being agility of the art, I'll call it the art market, but I think more broadly the arts ecosystem, because I think, non-for-profit sectors are in this as well. So agility needed to find new ways to very quickly still present material back out to the audience. There's a great story or sort of anecdote that the movie industry in the Great Depression never lost any of its value, because the one thing people could do, even when they had quite literally no, food in their refrigerator, was go, catch a movie, and films were still being produced. And I think in many ways, there's a lot of parallels to how much people are looking for that stimulus that comes through experiencing the art. And now much of that is online. So I think there's a great agility, there's a great sort of quick and speediness that the industry on a whole has had to react to. But I think it's also really challenged, in particular, museums, and Holly and Anna were mentioning this as well. We've seen so many museums either shutter or in fact reach out to the auction houses about deaccessioning because they need to free up some funds so that they can continue to exist. And so, we're seeing a real shift. But interestingly, we're also seeing a much I think much more openness to sort of digital kind of experiential artwork. I think about anything that can be presented, whether it's online or it can be sort of experienced online, or it's, you start to see upticks in artist collectives. Team Lab out of Japan, I think, is a great example, that have this incredible Instagram presence. We're just starting to see so many people almost pivot their interests and their tastes because they can't necessarily just walk into a museum and sort of see the classics hanging on the wall. So it's, I think it's going to have some really long lasting impacts on the whole industry.
That's really interesting that it's been pivoting also sales.
Tremendously.
Wow. On my side, the question of space, I really hope that we can still continue to work in physical space because I love that. So I hope that that's not going to totally change. But this year has definitely, COVID has definitely changed a lot. But I'm hoping that actually it can be a positive change. I would like to talk about one thing in particular. For me, as an independent, most projects were pushed back or canceled, or we'll talk about 2021, 2022. That's the reality of museums right now. They're all rescheduling. And so I'm also not promoting any new projects, which means there was a bit of time. And so in COVID-19, I was speaking with an artist friend in London, and we decided to launch a platform that would help people to continue networking and to continue working. And that was purely, I mean, the situation of the pandemic was really the impulse for this, and it was actually incredibly successful. We had an open call, and we used an algorithm to match photographers with photographic projects with experts in the industry, so publishers, curators, museum directors, festivals. And the idea was we all need to continue talking about our creative projects. We also still need that sounding board, and there aren't the festivals, the art fairs, and the exhibition openings where we can connect. And there's that aspect of what we do that's so important. It is networking; it's crucial. And so we, because of COVID, we launched this online platform where we, over 3 days, hosted 140 meetings on Zoom, where people that we didn't necessarily know, we helped them connect with each other, talk about photography for 30 minutes, and then hopefully they stay in touch. And the idea was, how can we, and I think it's beautiful because actually we were able to, given the circumstance, push the possibility of something no one would have been keen to try 2 years ago. And I think that now, moving forward, that it may become something we do very differently in our industry. We no longer have to say, in order to have a meeting, you have to physically go to be with someone. Although there's a benefit of that, I think the digital sphere has, through the pandemic, started to break down those barriers. Whereas before something was impossible without an in-person meeting, now we can still actually consider collaborating internationally via Zoom.
Absolutely. Kind of like this conversation, in fact, in a way that I don't know that we would have done 10 months ago. So yeah, and it's, I mean, similar considerations on this end as well. I think as we move to do some exhibitions virtually in the spring and hopefully in person, I think that opens up our audience in really interesting ways. And I think often opens up the opportunity for collective organizing in a way that is not always stressed in the field. And now it's a necessity, and that's, complicated, but that there are positive aspects to that as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Theresa put the alum relations email there. Feel free to email me if you have other questions. We can get those questions to Holly and Emily. Theresa, anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody again, and thank you for taking the time, whether it's your lunch hour or what time of the day it is, to be here with us. COVID has definitely impacted us, like Anna was saying too, in just what we're doing right now. And we're able to engage more alums in programs like this. So if you do have ideas of things that you would like to see, you can always let us know. I'll be sending out a recording of this as well. And I just appreciate your time. And Anna, Emily, and Holly, what a pleasure it has been to get to know you, like I said, during this. And I really do appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, and send your questions along, and we'll see you on the next Zoom.